This is lesson 1128, the end of the Cold War. Major players in the end of the Cold War. We've got Mikhail Gorbachev, and right behind him is Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of England. We've also got Lech Walesa, Pope John Paul II, and Ronald Reagan. There's our Pope right there, keeping a sharp eye out on everyone. First, what is a communist economy? A communist economy is a command economy. It's an economy directed by the government. The government controls all means of production, whether it's land, labor, or capital. They're all state-owned and state-controlled. And the government makes all economic choices of what to produce, how to produce, and how to distribute. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union's command economy was failing. People had little incentive to work hard since they would not be rewarded with better pay. The economy could not compete with the Western free market economies. As the Soviet people saw their economy crumbling, discontent began to grow in the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev was elected Soviet leader in 1985, and he slowly moved the Soviet Union away from totalitarianism. One policy that he supported was called perestroika, and that was economic restructuring, which allowed some private property. Another policy was glasnost, openness, which allowed the people more rights and freedoms, particularly of expression. And he took Soviet troops out of Afghanistan. They had been there for years, not as long as we've been there. Gorbachev versus Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was elected president in the year 1980, and he immediately went on the offensive against communism. He called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Ronald Reagan proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, a satellite and ground-based protection system from nukes that could completely neutralize the Soviet Union's ability to destroy us. The amazing thing about the Strategic Defense Initiative was that it didn't exist. But Ronald Reagan, a former actor, could talk about the Strategic Defense Initiative with total conviction as if it did exist. And the Soviets believed that the United States could do anything it put its mind to. In 1985, Gorbachev and Reagan met in person and began discussing ways to limit the Cold War. They agreed to limit their weapon stockpiles and end the arms race. Gorbachev agreed to democratization, or allowing the people to choose their government, and the Cold War began to thaw. At the same time that the Soviet Union began to change, Eastern European countries began hungering for freedom. Countries behind the Iron Curtain were poor, but they could see their nearby neighbor countries were wealthy. And this led to the growth of resistance movements against their Soviet controllers. Meanwhile, solidarity. Poland was one of the USSR's Eastern Bloc communist satellite countries, as we know. Workers' unions were not allowed. Why would there be unions when the Communist Party is the champion of the workers? Pope John Paul II, who was himself Polish, became Pope in 1978. And he served as an inspiration to the Polish people. Poland is a heavily Catholic country. The communists could not oppress the Pope, and John Paul II visited Poland in 1979 and preached all over Poland. He encouraged the Polish people to resist communism and not be afraid. Poland's port city of Gdansk had a huge shipyard. In August of 1980, 16,000 workers stopped working and occupied the shipyard for 18 days. They demanded the right to form any free trade unions that they wanted. They demanded freedom of speech. They demanded the release of political prisoners, and they demanded economic reforms. The government gave in and signed the Gdansk Agreement, a workers' trade union against a communist government. Weird. Communism is supposed to be inherently for the workers. Their leader was an electrician named Lech Walesa, a devout Catholic in a devout Catholic country. And Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the USSR, refused to use violence to suppress the Polish people. Lech Walesa and his followers organized a free and democratic workers' union as agreed to in the Gdansk Agreement, and this union would be called Solidarity. Solidarity grew to 9.5 million members, and they could strike anytime they wanted to. So the USSR didn't try to crush them. Many members of Solidarity thought that Lech Walesa was too moderate and not tough enough on communism, and this caused Solidarity to weaken a little bit. But in December of 1981, the Polish communist government outlawed Solidarity and started arresting members. Solidarity became popular again as an underground movement. But more importantly, so many Poles started acting as if they had the kinds of freedoms that Solidarity was demanding that the government couldn't suppress them. Things like political freedom, religious freedom, cultural freedom, trade union rights, patriotic nationalism, and more humane socialism. In 1988, Solidarity called for strikes across the nation, and this shut Poland's entire economy down, and it forced the government to negotiate with Solidarity. In 1989, Solidarity was legalized and got the right to run as a political party against the Communist Party in parliamentary elections, and Solidarity won the majority of seats in the Polish parliament. The Communist Party was out, and Solidarity was now in charge of the Polish government by free elections. Lech Walesa himself, the electrician who became Solidarity's leader, actually became president of Poland from 1990 to 1995. Solidarity's challenge encouraged free thinking in the USSR. Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the USSR, refused to use violence to suppress the Polish people. Because of this example, the Hungarian people overthrew their communist government in 1989. The East German government opened the Berlin Wall in 1988, and these events inspired East Germans. In 1989, Berliners began tearing down the Berlin Wall. And when the wall was torn down, Germany was finally reunited as one democratic country in 1990. The ultimate symbol of Soviet oppression was destroyed. Events throughout Europe began inspiring states in the Soviet Union to want freedom also. Lithuania was the first Soviet state to declare independence in 1990. And although Gorbachev tried to blockade them, he failed. And this led to the Soviet Union falling apart in 1991.